Hey folks, today we're going to take a look at a game that is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter. That game is called The Final Flicktier, and it's from Barrett Publishing. Now, if you like what you see throughout the rest of this preview video, I'm going to encourage you to go to the official Kickstarter project page, and you can do that by following the link in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. Those links will take you to the page, and you can find out more information than I could possibly tell you here, and hopefully you will consider backing the project. Now, The Final Flicktier is actually a 4X strategy game where you and the other players are galactic factions in the far future, or maybe the distant past, who knows, you know how that works, who are trying to vie for supremacy across this stretch of space by going to different planets, exploiting their resources, using those resources to build structures on the planets or to upgrade the technological capabilities of your faction, fighting the other players for supremacy, like actually physically fighting them, and so on and so forth. Now, that might sound like a lot of other games out here, that are out there, but here's the unique thing about this game, and it leads back to the title of the game. You are actually flicking dice. The dice represent your ships in the game, and each faction has different dice that they can flick, and you're going to flick them across the map, try to fight your opponents, and try to get those ships to the planets as well. That's your main method of movement too. So let me go ahead and give you a brief look at how the game is played with a prototype copy of the game. So just do bear in mind that what you see here may change in the final version just a little bit at least. But then we're going to come back and we will discuss it further. The Final Flicktier is a competitive 4X strategy game for 2 to 4 players. Each player represents a faction vying for supremacy in the galaxy. The ships they'll use for this are represented by dice that you'll flick across the galaxy map. You'll attack the other players, build structures, explore planets, harvest resources, and upgrade your faction. The game ends whenever all the victory point tokens are gone, or when a player has built their last structure, or when the missions run out. Whoever has the most points at that point is the winner of the game. Start the setup by laying out and combining the 2 game mats to create the galaxy. Once finished, the home worlds of the 4-player faction should be in each corner, and there should be no gap between the mats to allow for unobstructed flicking. There are 8 neutral planets on the map, and on each of them you will randomly place a resource token face up in the center, representing either graphene, trade goods, quantum, or tech, the resources of the game. Decks of resource cards representing those same resources are shuffled and placed near the board. Each player gets one of each of these resource cards for their starting hand. These can be used either as the depicted resource or for combat. You keep the combat side of the card hidden from your opponents. That side has a number from 1 to 4, and we'll get back to that later. Each player will select a faction and take their faction board. The faction board has 2 upgrade tracks where you can spend resources to improve your capabilities and gain special abilities, and places to stack your circular and square structure tokens, which can also be built during the game by spending resources. You'll place 2 cubes at the start of each upgrade track and stack your faction-specific structure tokens nearby. Then there are the ships. Each faction has its own set of 3 dice ships of different values. Place them on your home planet on any side for now. Next, shuffle a number of mission cards based on the number of players and place them near the board. Then flip over 3 cards to make the supply of missions players can attempt to complete at any given time. Finally, make a supply of various tokens. There are a certain number of victory point tokens based on the number of players. There are exploration tokens that are shuffled and kept in a stack with a random amount of victory points from 1 to 3 on the other side. And finally, the hyperspace token, which is used for combat, and again, we'll get to that in a minute. Randomly decide the start player and begin. On your turn, you may perform 2 actions, and they must be different. The first type of action is moving. Flick one of your dice with a quick movement of your finger, but without just pushing, sliding, or lifting up the die. You can also only change a die's face when it is on your home planet. When flicked, whatever face it ends up on is where it must remain. And in order to be considered on a space, like a planet, part of the die must at least touch the boundary of the object. If another object is in your path, you may temporarily move it as long as you put it back exactly where it should be after the flick. The next type of action is attacking. You can attack one of your opponent's ships with your own ship, no matter the distance. When you decide to do so, you must take a resource card from hand and place it face down. Your opponent can do the same if they want to and if they can. Next, place the hyperspace token diagonally behind and to the side of your target. Then, you can flick. 3 things might happen. If you fail to hit the opponent's die with your die, it's just a miss. Nothing happens, your die stays where it lands, and both players take their resource cards back into hand without revealing it. It's also possible that your die knocks your opponent's die back beyond the hyperspace token that's behind it, in which case your opponent escapes and they can place their die anywhere they want on the board. Resource cards go back to hand unseen and nothing else happens. Instead, you might hit the opponent's die and it doesn't move beyond the length of the hyperspace token, and then it's a potential hit. Both players will now flip their cards and add the number on the other side to the face-up number on their ship die. The higher total wins, with ties going to the attacker. The winner stays where they are, and the losing ship goes back to its home planet, and the winner gets a victory point token. Also, the player resource cards for both players stay face down in their play area. They can no longer be used in combat, but can still be used for the depicted resource before being discarded forever. The next type of action is building. If you have a ship on a planet, you can pay the required resource costs and build one of your circular or square structures, placing the token on the planet. These are worth the indicated victory points at the end of the game, but perhaps more importantly, during the game, they will grant you special abilities. For instance, the United Earth Alliance can build warp gates allowing ships to travel instantaneously, and the Surge can build hatcheries, which can be worth many points if you have the right upgrade. The next action is exploiting. If you have ships or circular structures on planets, you can take one resource card that matches the token on the planet up to 3 times for 3 such planets. The cards go to your hand as normal, but at the end of your turn, you may only have a total of 9 cards between your hand and cards on the table, and you must discard if you have more than that. The next action is completing a mission. If you meet the requirements of one of the face-up missions in the supply, you take the card and place it face down in front of you for points later. Then, you replace the card in the lineup with a new card from the deck. Some of the missions are for delivery, and you'll need to have one of your ships on the indicated planet and discard the indicated resource to claim the mission. Others are exploration, and when they come up, you'll need to place an Explorer token on the indicated sector face down, and then if you have a ship there, you can claim the mission and take the token and its hidden points. Finally, there are a few missions with very specific and unique requirements, like having 3 ships on the same planet. Another action is upgrading. Pay the upgrade cost for the next box on one of your 2 tracks and move the cube to that spot. You'll then immediately gain access to the upgrade ability. All factions have 2 common abilities, +1 flick when moving, and -1 resource to build structures. But the other upgrades are unique to each faction. It can be things like increasing victory points for certain actions, giving you re-flicks for moves or attacks, or in the case of the Coravali Trade Federation, even claiming a delivery mission in the lineup as your own before you can actually complete it. The final action is returning. You can remove any number of your dice from the play area and put them back onto your home planet. This includes dice that may have fallen outside the play area or even on the floor. The game ends when either the last victory point token has been claimed, someone has built all of their structures, or the mission deck is empty and the active player needs to draw a card. That player will finish out their turn, then every other player, including the current player, gets 1 more turn. Count up your points from structures, combat, missions, and faction-specific bonuses. Whoever has the most points is the winner, with ties going to whoever has the most combat value left in hand at the end of the game. That is the final Flicktier. Now, there are other 4X games out there, and there are other dice flicking games out there. Very rarely, however, maybe not ever before, do those 2 concepts meet like this. It's just a very interesting thing there, because really, you hear a dice flicking game and you think, oh, not a game to be taken seriously, right? Maybe it's a kid's game, maybe it's just a very, very light one-on-one dueling game, something like that. But in this case, there is a very serious amount of strategy that has to be taken into account. It is 4X, which I don't always remember all of the X's there, but, explore, exploit, expand, and, I was so close. Maybe it'll come to me before the end. But you really do have to do all of those things. You have to very carefully exterminate. See? You have to very carefully manage your burgeoning empire. You have to figure out how far down the faction tracks you want to go, because those cost valuable resources. Do you not want to bother with that too much because you said want to go for structures, but structures can play off of upgrades and vice versa. You can fight your opponents as much as you possibly can, but that's a risky thing too, because you're just, you're using one of your valuable actions, you only get 2 per turn, to flick something out there that might just go wildly careening off into space and either not hit your opponent or hit your opponent too hard, and giving them a chance to fling themselves into hyperspace, which is a very interesting concept and thematic concept of the game. And then you might end up with nothing, or give your opponent a point if they actually win the combat, if it comes down to that. So it's a very risky thing, but it could be, a free point, and you still get to keep the resource card that you use. So that's an interesting concept too. Even though you have to spend resource cards for combat, you still get to use it as a resource later, just not as combat. So not too risky, but again, using that valuable action for that as opposed to all these other things that you can do can be a dangerous gamble. And on top of that, you have the missions as well, where sometimes you just want to be like, okay, if I end up on a planet, then maybe I'll try to go for that deliver mission. But maybe you want to go for that as hard as you can. And, some factions lend themselves to certain things more often. Some of them are more combat-oriented. Some of them, like that Trade Federation, the Core Volley Trade Federation, can actually lock down delivery mission cards for themselves. And so maybe you want to go more for missions with that faction, among other reasons why you might want to do that. And every faction has a different thematic feel as well that also lends itself to gameplay. So then when you want to talk about the Surge, where the Surge wants to, they're like the... I won't use proper names, but like the alien species that has like hives, and they want to just breed as much as possible, and they have techno-organic type ships and things like that. So they want to have as many hatcheries on as many planets as possible, and if you can get the right upgrade, it's going to make them worth points at the end, and that's a massive way, potentially, that you could win the game without even having to go through too much combat, or without having to go through too many missions and things like that. So many different ways to get points and things that you need to worry about. And you're not doing this in a vacuum. Well, it's the vacuum of space, but you know what I mean. There are other players who might try to foil your plans if you just want to turtle up and just focus on your own little thing without interacting. You may not have that choice, in which case you need to really strategize what best combat cards to have. If you have the choice of spending multiple resources, you want to save your higher value, combat valued ones instead. And choices like that. So it's one of those things where, yes, there is a dice flicking mechanism at the center of the game. It is if you want to use a word like gimmick of the game, sure. But you cannot just be good at that and expect to do well. You need to worry about the strategy. But at the same time, I guess I have to stress that it's not an overwhelming complexity to the game. It's actually a very easy game to set up. It's a very easy game to teach and a very fast game to teach and set up, and to actually play a session of the game, because there are 3 different ways that the game can end, and all of them can happen within a relatively quick amount of time depending on what players choose to focus on. The game doesn't overstay its welcome. So while I would not call it a light game because of the 4X strategy involved, it's certainly a game that could be taught to more casual players, or to younger players as well. You have that space theme that can really help out with those, getting those new type of people into the game. And hey, who doesn't like flicking dice? At a certain point, as long as, even grouchier gamers who really just want strategy, as long as they have that strategy that they can be working on, then they might even find themselves enjoying the dice flicking as well. So, if any of that sounds like it appeals to you, if you like the interesting, unique concept at the center of this game of blending these 2 different genres, heavy strategy and dice flicking, if you like the theme, if you like the high quality artwork, and just how the game presents itself, or if you know someone who does, Don't take my word for it. Go to the official Kickstarter project page and find out more information for yourself. You can do that by following the link in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. That is the final Flicktier from Barrett Publishing. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, for supporting our sponsors. Take care.